What is happening, my crazy restaurant people? So I wanted to make this quick video. I just got off the phone call with one of my clients down in Florida, and she is in a touristic area. She has an amazing little poke restaurant. And as we were discussing some of the systems that we're going to use for Diner, I realized that she doesn't know her numbers. So when I was probing, I was asking about, her best items, her worst items, and I said, okay, so what's your prime cost? And she goes, prime cost, what's that? And I've had this conversation with a lot of people, so I figured I would put this out there, and hopefully it will bring some clarity to your business so you can make a little bit, if not a lot more money. And I'll explain it, I'll show you how it works, show you how you can fix it, and even more importantly, I'll show you in real world what that looks like. Because when I first had one of my businesses, or my last one, I didn't know what prime cost was. And then once I realized what it was, I was able to shave a bunch of expenses and therefore make a lot more money. And I'll get into that in a second, and I'll show you how you can do it yourself. So what is prime cost? Prime cost, in my opinion, is the lifeblood of your business. It is basically your controllable costs. So prime cost for restaurants is your total of two major expenses. It's your cost of goods sold, so any food, ingredients, packaging, anything like that, and your labor costs, so any wages, salaried or any hourly employees, payroll taxes, etc. So what you do is you add up your cost of goods sold or your food cost and add up your labor cost, and then you subtract it from your total sales, and that's how you arrive at a number. So what does that look like? If you have a restaurant and you sold $1,000 this week, you pay $300 in food and $300 in labor, that's $600, and then you subtract it from the $1,000, and that means you have a 60% prime cost. Now, it's never that simple, and I'll explain to you a little bit more why. So here, why is this important to you? So prime cost is super important for a couple different reasons. Number one, it is how it's a controllable expense in your restaurant. So this is the way that you can actually control the costs, because you can't change like your utility bill. You can't change you can change the utility a little bit, but your gas, your rent, your insurance, these are fixed costs. You can't change them. What you agreed on in the beginning of the year is what you're going to pay throughout the year. But your food costs and your labor, for example, sending somebody home early when it's slow, or reducing portion control or something along those lines, can really make an effect over time, especially because, again, we're playing with pennies and it's a penny business, in my opinion. So here I have most profitable restaurants can keep below 55% of total sales, and 60% is kind of the max. In my experience and what I've seen in industry averages is a QSR, quick service, fast casual restaurant, you're kind of running between a 55 to 60% range. If you can get it below that range, good for you. You might want to be careful that you're not eliminating good service by doing that, but I'll get into that momentarily. But if it's a full service restaurant, it's typically between 60 and 65%, because you have more cooks, you have more staff, you have runners, you have bussers, you have all these different people, and it tends to get a little bit more expensive. But it's a good idea to kind of look at it between a 55 and 60% for a quick service restaurant, or a 60 to 65 for a full service restaurant. But these again are things that you can control. So there's certain times of the year that you're going to be busier, certain times you're going to be slower, and certain times you're going to have to cut things away, or certain days that you're going to have to cut things away. But here's the two reasons why I think it's important is, let's say for example you're dealing with theft. If you don't understand where your numbers are and you see 1 week it jumps and there's no way to justify it. So for example, you had a big purchase, or you purchased from a supplier for the whole month or for 2 months or something along those lines, you can't really understand where the money went for that time. I used to use a system where we had a 4-week kind of averages, where we would average it out for 4 weeks. And that way you can see if you had a big purchase, then it would spike 1 week, but then it would kind of go lower the next couple of weeks, and it would average out to give you an average prime cost across those weeks. So one thing is like theft, for example, you can see that. Another one I wrote down here is I was actually looking at investing in a gelato shop, and I asked them what their prime cost was. They actually didn't know what it was, but all they did is give me their P&L, and I can easily see some very, very key numbers. They were saying that they were making like hundreds of thousands of dollars off of it, only $500,000 in sales, which was very kind of like that was a red light for me, or a red flag. And what I realized is they had really good high labor costs for gelato shop, but they had a really, really low food cost. So their food cost was about 10%. And in that industry, especially gelato, if you're making it properly, it's actually way more than that. It's in and around the 27 to 35%, depending on the high quality stuff that you use and how much you throw out. So it was a huge red flag, and I ended up not moving forward. But let me give you what I used to do at my business. So I used to own a restaurant. It was called Noble Burgers. It was an organic burger restaurant. And this is actually a clip from a LinkedIn blog that I wrote, but it just basically tells a story about when I had my restaurant and I didn't know what it was. I was running a prime cost at about 63%. So when I first tracked it, I was at 63%. So I thought that that was good. I thought my labor was low. I thought my food was low, but it wasn't the case. I think at the time, if I remember correctly, I think I was running at around about 35% food cost, and I think it was like a 28% labor cost or something along those lines. So after I started tracking it, it made a massive difference in my business. So over the next year, I lowered it. It went down to 57%. So 63 to 57. Okay, so it's only a 6% difference. It's not a big deal. And this is what I wrote even in my article. But if you're doing 800,000, which I was doing at the time, which was fairly in the first few years of my last location, and I didn't know what it was. 800,000, do the math, 6% of that is 51,000. And that was just doing small adjustments within my business. So I made an additional 51,000 in my pocket just because I started measuring prime cost. That's how mega this is. If you don't know what your prime cost is, you could be leaving tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands on the table. That was at 800,000. Once we hit $1 million plus, we're talking 60, 70, $80,000 more that would go into my pocket just because we were monitoring this every week and then looking at a 4-week average. And we didn't do this manually. You can do it manually. It's super easy to do. We actually use programs to do it. I'd be happy to share those programs that we did. I actually recommend. But basically, small changes could make big dollars to your bottom line. I wrote these 2 quotes because I'm a super quote guy. Lord Kelvin put it this way: if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. This is should be almost tattooed somewhere in your restaurant, is if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. And prime cost is the number one thing that you should be measuring every week in your business. I used to have my management do it, and this was the KPIs. This is what they used to send me every week to make sure that I knew that we were adhering to certain numbers so we can maintain profitability. And Peter Drucker, who's the GOAT of business management, and he says what gets measured gets managed. So if you're not managing your numbers, that's because you're not measuring them. I hope this helps. This made a massive difference in my business, and I could make a massive difference in yours. So get to know your numbers. I'll make more videos like this. If you have any questions, leave them any comments below. But otherwise, shoot me a message. I'd be happy to help you out. Cheers.